Good evening and welcome to our discussion. Tonight we delve into a complex and often heated question. Should sports teams be held responsible for the behavior of their fans? Incidents involving fan conduct, ranging from disruptive chanting to outright violence, frequently make headlines, raising questions about accountability. Joining me to explore this are two experts with distinct perspectives. Dr. David Miller is a sociologist specializing in sports culture, who argues that teams bear significant responsibility. And Ms. Emily Vance is a sports lawyer, who contends that the primary responsibility lies elsewhere. Welcome to you both. We'll begin with opening statements, followed by moderated discussion, and conclude with closing remarks. Dr. Miller, please begin.
Thank you, Sarah. The core of my argument is this. Sports teams are not passive bystanders in the creation of their fan communities. They actively cultivate these communities, benefiting immensely from the passion, loyalty, and financial contributions of their supporters. This deep connection, fostered through branding, marketing, and the very atmosphere they create at games, comes with an inherent responsibility. Teams possess considerable influence over the culture surrounding their brand. Think about the messaging they put out, the standards they set for player conduct, the security protocols within their stadiums, and the overall fan experience they curate. They shape the environment in which fandom exists. Therefore, taking responsibility means implementing proactive, not just reactive, measures. This includes establishing and rigorously enforcing clear codes of conduct for fans, investing in effective security and stewarding, and developing fan education programs that promote respect and inclusivity. Crucially, sanctions against misconduct, such as stadium bans or membership revocations, must be applied consistently and transparently. Ignoring or downplaying negative behavior, be it racism, hooliganism, homophobia, or targeted abuse, sends a dangerous message. It can be interpreted as tacit acceptance, which ultimately damages the team's reputation, alienates potential fans, and harms the integrity of the sport itself. Let me be clear. This isn't about controlling every single individual's thoughts or actions. That's impossible. It's about the team actively using its power and influence to foster a safer, more welcoming, and respectful environment for everyone associated with the club. It's about shaping the norms of the community they profit from.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Now, for an opposing perspective, Ms. Vance, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Dr. Miller raises important points about influence, but from a legal and practical standpoint, placing primary responsibility for fan behavior onto sports teams is problematic and potentially unjust. The foundational principle in most legal systems is individual accountability. If a fan commits an assault, utters racial slurs, or damages property, that individual is responsible for their actions under the law. Criminal behavior should be addressed by law enforcement and the justice system, not primarily by sports organizations whose expertise lies elsewhere. Consider the practical challenges. How can a team realistically monitor, let alone control, the actions of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, of individuals who identify as fans? Much problematic behavior occurs outside the stadium, in pubs, on public transport, or increasingly, online. Expecting a team to police these domains is simply unfeasible and raises significant privacy concerns. Furthermore, defining the legal scope of a team's duty of care regarding fan behavior is extremely complex. Where does it begin and end? What level of foreseeability is required for liability to attach, especially for spontaneous acts by individuals? Establishing causation. Proving the team's actions or inactions directly led to a specific fan's misconduct is a high legal bar. There's also a significant risk of unfairness. Holding a team responsible, perhaps through fines or point deductions, effectively punishes the club, its players, and the vast majority of well-behaved fans for the deplorable actions of a small minority. This concept of collective punishment is contrary to basic principles of justice. While I agree that teams should absolutely promote positive behavior and cooperate fully with authorities, the primary legal and moral responsibility for misconduct must remain firmly with the individual perpetrator.
Thank you both for laying out your positions so clearly. Let's move into our first round of discussion, focusing on the scope and limits of this potential responsibility. David, you argue teams shape the environment. But where do you draw the line? Is a team responsible for a fan's racist tweet sent from their home? How far does this tweet want realistically extend beyond the stadium gates?
That's a crucial question. The responsibility is strongest within the spaces the team directly controls: the stadium, official events, and official online platforms. Inside the stadium, they set the rules, manage security, and can eject or ban individuals. Regarding online behavior, if a fan uses official club channels to spread hate, or if a known season ticket holder is identified making racist remarks online that bring the club into disrepute, the team has grounds, and I argue a responsibility, to act, perhaps by revoking membership or banning them. It's less about policing the entire internet and more about addressing behavior directly linked to the club identity or carried out by identifiable members of their official community, especially when it violates their stated values.
Emily, David mentions acting against identifiable members. While individuals are legally accountable for their actions, don't teams have at least some duty of care, particularly within their own stadiums where they control access, security, and alcohol sales, for instance?
Certainly, teams have a duty of care to provide a reasonably safe environment within their premises. That's standard premises liability. This involves adequate security, crowd management, and responding appropriately to incidents that occur. However, this is different from holding the team terms responsible for the fan's decision to commit misconduct. The duty is to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm, not to guarantee that no fan will ever misbehave. If the team fails in its reasonable duties, say, grossly inadequate security leads to a preventable assault, then they might face liability for negligence. But that's distinct from being liable for the fan's underlying action itself.
Let's talk about measures like stadium bans. David, how effective do you believe these are as a deterrent? And Emily, are these bans legally robust, or do they face challenges?
Stadium bans can be effective, especially when consistently applied and widely communicated. They send a clear message that certain behaviors are unacceptable within the fan community. However, their effectiveness depends on enforcement, which requires resources and coordination, sometimes across different clubs and leagues, and they don't address the root causes or off-site behavior. They are a necessary tool, but not a complete solution.
Legally, bans imposed by private entities like sports clubs are generally permissible, provided they follow their own procedures fairly and don't breach discrimination laws. Fans typically agree to codes of conduct when purchasing tickets or memberships. Challenges can arise regarding identification, due process, the fan's right to contest the ban, and the length or scope of the ban. But overall, teams have significant latitude to exclude individuals from their private property and events based on conduct violations.
Interesting points. Let's shift to our second round, focusing on specific scenarios. Should a team face different levels of responsibility, or perhaps different consequences, for fan violence compared to, say, offensive chanting? David?
I believe the response should be proportionate to the harm and nature of the offense. Physical violence clearly demands immediate ejection, police involvement, and likely a long-term ban. It's a direct threat to safety. Offensive chanting, particularly discriminatory chants targeting race, religion, or sexuality, is also extremely serious. It creates a hostile environment and normalizes prejudice. Teams must have clear policies to stop such chanting, identify perpetrators if possible, and issue warnings or sanctions. While perhaps not leading to the same immediate physical danger as violence, The corrosive effect of hate speech requires a strong, consistent response from the club to demonstrate its values.
Emily, legally, how does the location inside versus outside the stadium impact potential team liability for these different types of behavior?
The location is critical. Inside the stadium, as discussed, the team has greater control and thus a clearer duty of care regarding safety and conduct on their premises. Liability, if any, usually stems from negligence in managing that environment. Outside the stadium, the team's control diminishes significantly, making it far harder to establish a legal duty or liability for fan actions. Unless the team actively organized or incited the off-site behavior, which is rare, holding them legally responsible is highly unlikely. Responsibility for public order outside the ground generally falls to the police. Teams might cooperate, but they don't typically bear legal liability for what happens on public streets or online, barring exceptional circumstances.
David, what role should governing bodies and leagues play in this? Should standards and enforcement come from the top down, or is it better left to individual clubs?
I think it requires a combination. Governing bodies and leagues are essential for setting minimum standards, creating league-wide policies like standardized codes of conduct or procedures for handling discrimination, and facilitating information sharing about banned individuals. They can also impose sanctions on clubs that consistently fail to address fan misconduct issues, providing an incentive for clubs to take their responsibilities seriously. However, individual clubs know their fan bases best and are best placed to implement tailored education programs and manage their specific stadium environments.
One final point in this round. Does it matter who the target of the misbehavior is? Players, officials, or other fans? Emily, does this change the legal perspective?
From a purely legal liability standpoint for the asterisk team, the specific target might be less significant than the nature of the act and whether the team breached its duty of care. However, the target can be relevant in other ways. For instance, abuse directed at players or officials might trigger specific regulations from the league or governing body regarding protecting participants. Threats or assaults against anyone are criminal matters. Discrimination targeting specific groups raises equality law considerations. So while the core legal test for team liability might not fundamentally change, the context and consequences certainly differ depending on the victim and the nature of the abuse.
Thank you both. We now move to closing statements. Each of you will have a brief opportunity to summarize your position. Ms. Vance, please go first.
Throughout this discussion, I've emphasized a principle of individual accountability. Those who commit offenses are responsible for their actions, and the legal system is equipped to handle this. While teams absolutely have a role in promoting good conduct and ensuring safety on their premises, extending their legal responsibility to cover the independent actions of potentially millions of fans is impractical, legally complex, and fundamentally unfair. Teams should foster positive environments, but they cannot be the primary guarantors or insurers of individual fan behavior. That responsibility must remain with the individual.
Thank you, Ms. Vance. Dr. Miller, your closing statement.
Sports teams are powerful social institutions that cultivate, shape, and profit from intense fan loyalty. This influence comes with a moral and social obligation to actively foster a positive and respectful fan culture. Taking responsibility isn't about impossible control over individuals. It's about proactive measures, clear rules, consistent enforcement, education, and using their platform to stand against hate and violence. Ignoring misconduct due to perceived difficulty is an abdication of responsibility that harms the sport and society. Teams must be part of the solution.
Dr. Miller, Ms. Vance, thank you for a compelling and insightful debate. You've highlighted the core tension between a team's undeniable influence and connection to its fans, and the fundamental principle of individual legal responsibility. It's clear there are no easy answers, involving complex legal, ethical, and practical considerations. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us tonight. That concludes our discussion on team responsibility for fan behavior. Thank you for watching.